I grew up in Southern California, so I kind of came from just right outside of Hollywood. I was born in Santa Monica, grew up around Malibu, and all of those names should conjure up many thoughts of superficiality and movies and beauty, and all of that's true.
Nice weather.
Thank you. One positive thing, nice weather. No, it's so much more than all of those things, but that is a very real part of kind of just the energy of the city, of what's valued, and so I grew up in a bit of a dichotomy within myself. As a teenager, I'm growing up where I'm literally running into the Kardashians and the Olsen twins at Malibu Mart on a regular basis, kind of in the heart of so much of kind of the notion that sexual expression is the highest goal of the human life, and there's kind of this real provocative expression of sexuality that was always at my doorstep and around me, and I was kind of just as a young woman, trying to figure out what that looked like for me. Was I supposed to be modeling myself after these goals? Was this the purpose of life? Was this the kind of where satisfaction was at? And then I also had the whole other side of having my roots in a very conservative Christian church. And so I had this world where it was kind of an oversaturation of sexuality, and then another world in which I felt that the church I was a part of rarely spoke about sexuality at all. And if they did, it was kind of a hush-hush, yes, of course it happens in marriage, but we don't need to speak any further about that. And it was just hard to know, am I supposed to be expressing myself this way, or am I supposed to really be denying this entire part of who I am, and what seems just natural and instinctual? And so I had that dichotomy at the heart of a lot of my questions. And you can imagine the kind of shame that is kind of immediately enters in when you have to start hiding even questions that you have. And also another part that's important to recognize as I look back on my journey is that when I was younger, I grew up in an amazing Christian home. A lot of people can't say that, but I actually had two very involved, grace-giving parents who loved me well, cared about the ins and outs of my life and all of that. And yet I actually thought I believed in the Christian God, but I had never encountered the love of Jesus in my own life. And what that led me to for half of my life, really, was a really deep desire for intimacy and for love. And because of lacking that encounter with the Lord, I found myself trying to find that everywhere else. And it led me, at the worst moments, to really compromise on what I believed was okay. I ended up getting involved in things even in middle school that eventually went public, that I never wanted to do but felt pressured to do in order to have that social affirmation and belonging. Went public, and actually was the only time in my life that I ever contemplated suicide, was because of just the shame that I had felt through what was a result of really my striving for belonging. And another element of that is going into high school, that kind of transitioning into looking for that satisfaction and love and identity and romance, and dating a guy because I wasn't clear in my judgments. I wasn't acting out of a place of fullness. Led me to date someone who had a notoriously horrible reputation. And it was really my first love, I thought. But really, he had been sleeping with his ex-girlfriend for our entire relationship. And so it was just absolutely crushed me, you can imagine, with someone as insecure as I was. So those are a bit of a picture of really where I was at when God found me, when God encountered me, and when he called me into a freedom and an anchored identity that would last the rest of my life. And so that's thankfully not the end of the story, but that's really a bit of kind of where I came from.
Amazing. David, can you share a bit with us as well about where you're coming from? What's your story been?
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, so it's really great to be doing this alongside Madeline and her story. And I think what we're talking about is actually a universally human question. So it's really good to be standing with you. For me, I grew up in an agnostic atheist household in Sydney, Australia. Some of you will know the story from last time, but for those that you don't, I became a strident kind of atheistic gay rights activist that hated Christians. In fact, when I saw Christian posters or Christians on campus at university, my face would kind of scrunch up and I'd be like, ugh. These vile, deluded people that want to try to brainwash me into believing in having a relationship with a first century Jewish carpenter. Like, what is wrong with them? Like, and that therefore, this supposed God that was manifested in this man hates me because I'm gay. Like, please. And so there was this just instant rejection of Christians. And I perceived that I was rejected by God. But what I didn't understand is that I was actually rejected in myself. I was actually controlled by self-rejection. I thought this atheistic gay activist persona that I grew into was going to be the solution, was going to protect me from pain and hurt. But actually, it was all about the fact that deep down, I actually really did want a relationship with God. And it was only until I was the age of 19 that I ended up in a pub in central Sydney, and a young filmmaker who looked fabulous and indie and arts, like an arts, aficionado, if you like. She was perfectly picked by Jesus to evangelize me because she was fabulous. And and there was something about this girl that was different. And I said, what inspired you to get your film into the largest short film competition in the world? And she just proceeded to tell me that it was God, to which I had the same kind of reaction that I would to those posters or those Christians on campus. And in our conversation, whenever I talked to Christians in the past, I'd say I'm gay, and they'd run in the other direction. Oh no, it's the question that we don't want to talk about. But she just wasn't threatened by that. And she just said, well, David, have you experienced the love of God? And that question just stopped me in my tracks, because first of all, I was a postmodern, so I was like, experiences? Yes, please. And spirituality, I'm open to that. I'm just an atheist. So then she says, can I pray for you? And I'm like, look, honey, you can pray for me, but I don't think anything's going to happen. So good luck. And she just prays the Christian prayer of the century over me. And as she does, I experience this presence. I mean, I've done Buddhist meditation. I've been a Wiccan witch for a week. I've been a Reformed Jew for a week. I'd been through my spiritual fads. And I can tell you that nothing compared to the reality of the God that she knew and that she introduced me to, and who asked me the question, do you want me? 3 times, and I've never heard a voice before in my life, and I knew that it wasn't my mind. I knew it was this real God outside of me speaking to me, and I said yes. And so really my life's never been the same, and I just experienced the love of God in that pub. And the book, A War of Loves, I had to write it down because it's something so deep and profound that you need to actually write it. And so you can go and check that out if you want to hear more of the story.
Amazing, David. So God meets you in that pub, and you're just overwhelmed by his love. Can you share a bit with us about how that experience of God's love has been significant for you going, not just beginning a Christian faith, but actually as the foundation to really going through all sorts of challenges in following Jesus?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that when Christians say homosexuality is a sin, that's often how Christians will respond to the question, what about gay people? What about homosexuality? What gay people hear is, so you're saying to me that I'm cut off from the greatest form of transcendence, which is relationship with God, and the second greatest form of transcendence or meaning, which is romantic relationship. So you're taking my transcendence away and you're deleting me out of existence. Of course the reaction is going to be angry. Of course. So for me, that's the only message I ever got from Christians up until that point, really, although there were a few exceptions to the rule, was that. That's all I had to go off. No one ever showed me Jesus. No one ever explained the gospel to me. Why would I give up my sexuality if I haven't discovered something more transcendent and more meaningful than it. And so actually, my journey was one of exploring, discovering, knowing more deeply this God that I'd encountered. And as I went, I found this huge well of depth and this huge well of intimacy and meaning in my life, that suddenly sexuality had a totally different meaning. And I was able then to give that to God and say, you can have it. Like, you want my money? You've got it. You want my body? It's yours. Like, God, you gave me your son on the cross. You gave me everything. How can I hold my sexuality back from you? And then I realized, actually, this doesn't just apply to LGBTQI people. This applies to the whole church. But is the church living it? And so I think what gay people do is we challenge the rest of the church to actually live the true gospel, the deeper gospel. And that's why we're having this event today. And that's why I'm here to share this story with you, is because I want you guys to find that deeper love, that deeper transcendence that will actually truly satisfy you and truly give you what life's meaning is really centrally about. So, yeah.
That's a really interesting point, because I think it's certainly the case that romantic love and ideals of romantic love are just all around us. What the culture, what our songs, the films we watch, TV shows, everything is driving towards fulfillment through an experience of romantic love. And perhaps even in the church as well, it's just as much an idol, if you like, in the church. Madeline, can you tell us, what do you think is going on with that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a big part of what makes sense to me of my own story, is that I think we often think when we're coming to the topic of love and what love really means, what sexuality really means, who we are, that we're kind of blank slates and we're making up our own mind because we're living in an age where we get to decide for ourselves these things. And in some ways, that's wonderful. But I think that we are actually, if we're honest with ourselves, we're inundated in an incubator every day with messages about what love is and what sexuality is intended for and what role and what kind of importance it's meant to play in our lives and the forming of our identity. And I think, so for all of us who are here, the messages that we're receiving from media is not all bad, but there's an importance of just recognizing, so we are conscious of the message that we're constantly being taught. And that's very much speaks to something deep in us, this longing for intimacy, right? This longing to be known and loved. People here who have experienced a sweet, tender, very healthy love from a parent, you know kind of just the comfort and safety of that. And people who have experienced healthy relationships romantically, you know the comfort and the euphoria of that at times. It speaks to something we're made for. But what's happened, I think, in our day is that there's a sense of having, at least for secular Western world, having kind of as a whole tried to remove God from the picture. It's elevated the self in our experience to a place where sexuality is no longer something that we do or something that we experience as part of our lives, but it's actually a defining feature of who we are. We are our sexuality, which makes sense of how much anger we feel when someone speaks against our actions in this area. It's like, how dare you? That is who I am. But is that all that we are? Or is that just a really important and beautiful part of it, but not a defining part of it? I think that's, for me, this kind of expressive individualism of you need to express yourself to be able to be true and authentic, combined with a real elevation of sexuality. It just makes it feel like if we don't have a romantic relationship, if we're not experiencing sexual gratification on a regular basis, then we're somehow less human. So there's been a real reduction of really what it means to be human. And I think that's gotten into the church as well. And I think there's a sense of idolatry around marriage, that it's really the only way, when really the most fully, complete, flourishing human to ever exist in the person of Jesus Christ was a celibate man who found the depth of satisfaction in his relationship with the Father and his love for mankind to be the satisfying anchor of his life. And there's something for us to learn from that today.
So David, do you think, as a gay man, that celibacy is really plausible? I mean, if God is asking that sex be in a relationship between a man and a woman in marriage, lifelong commitment? A, is that fair? B, is it livable? And C, is it good news for people who don't know Jesus? How could that possibly be good news?
Yeah, I think it was Shane Claiborne who said, you can live your life without sex, but you can't live your life without love. And I actually think that's the central teaching of Christianity that you see in the life of Jesus that Madeline just mentioned, is what I got released from when I became a Christian was the fact that I made my sexuality ultimate. And so what that did to me is it actually imprisoned me. Although it seemed fun and colorful and fabulous on the surface, and I could put great Instagram photos up or look really great on Facebook, deep down, I was starving for intimacy, real love. And I was actually just before I became a Christian, I was at a club in central Sydney and I wrote a question, what is love, down on a journal. And I was, surrounded by the kinds of people that always go to the top coffee shops, that are shopping in Melbourne, that are part of political parties, that are well-educated, that are supposed to have all the answers. And so I'm expecting to get this great response when I hand this around at my favorite club on Oxford Street in Sydney. And instead I get, what is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more. And I'm getting like all the pop songs, there's nothing profound. And I suppose it is a cliched question, so people gave me cliches back. But there was still this sense in which no one had an answer for that question. And so it wasn't until I encountered the love of Jesus that celibacy ever would have become plausible, because my whole value was invested in sexuality. My whole human value. If I didn't go to the gym and I didn't look fabulous and have a wonderful body and a really attractive boyfriend and lots of money and own an apartment in Paris with a poodle and adopt a Chinese orphan, then I wasn't worth anything. I was kind of like a failure. You pick your utopia, that was mine. So I discovered this other way of wrapping the meaning of my sexuality around something higher, and that actually freed me to live a more fully human life. And I think what Jesus is inviting us all into with our sexuality is a more fully human life. That making my sexuality an idol deprived me of the fullness of my humanity. The thing is, God didn't create us male and female in the beginning to oppress LGBTQI people. That was never his intention. And what I discovered was that God created them male and female in the beginning because he wanted to reflect the beauty of his own nature as love, to create two beings that are utterly distinct in some sense and yet completely alike in another, and that when they come together in the covenant of marriage, his glory is expressed in that. And that's not to exclude LGBTQI people. It's to express what he is like. And of course we fell, and then we ended up with the fact that our bodies desire all sorts of things that aren't God's will. And even Jesus had to pray, not my will, but yours be done. And so in all of our lives, there's a point at which we have to pray that prayer. Not my will, but yours be done. And then we, in return, receive the inner, intimate embrace of our Creator that satisfies us more than anything in the world. So yes, because of that, celibacy is totally plausible. One quick other thing is that we're also designed for human relationship. And I think that the art of friendship in our society has been massively denigrated. I mean, even if you look at Facebook, what is a friend? They're fair weather friends. They're not there for you. In the Christian church, I experience friends who were truly faithful to me and who have walked side by side with me, even though the church has been so horrible to LGBTQI people in many places. what I experienced when I came into the church as a gay man was friends who stood by me and loved me regardless of that. And in fact, saw some incredible potential in what God was doing in my life. And so it was those friendships that then became the source of intimacy that I needed. And I no longer needed necessarily to have a partner or, I could give that up to God.
That's awesome. So we talked a bit about LGBTQ questions and that very particular way of processing the Bible's teaching on sex and celibacy and all of that. But Madeline, for a moment, can we think about your experience and maybe even our experience as women? We're here quite often. Okay, well, as women alive today, we're in control of our bodies. We've got freedom now. We can sleep with whoever we want to sleep with, just like men always have done. How is it good news to be sort of embracing this, ancient ethic of commitment? Isn't the church really anti-pleasure for both men and women? How could that be good?
Yeah, no, it's such a good question. I think everyone here, probably male and female, can relate to it. And to this question that's very understandable from our cultural point of view when we're looking at Christianity. I think there's so much to say on that it's actually hard to figure out which part I want to focus on. But I think there's a sense in which we are told, yes, women, but also our generation in general, that what it really means to be free and to have dignity is to be able to do whatever we want. That it's kind of like, hey, don't let anyone tell you what to do. Only you tell yourself what you want to do, and you pursue that. And you've probably heard this. Like, if there's anyone who tells you not to do something you believe in, then just get them out of your life. If you think about what that means, the amount of isolation and autonomy involved in that worldview, that kind of it's just about doing whatever we want, has to do with our instincts, something that animals share with us. I want to be able to do what I want when I want to do it. Okay, yeah. We all do. We share that in common. We can kind of commiserate about this. But there's a sense in which we were given the true dignity by God of being able to make choices about those instincts and to ask ourselves, the way I go about pursuing love is in the way I define love, actually. The way I define love is going to have direct implications on how we go about pursuing it and how we go about chasing after it. So I think thinking that, as a woman, that I should have the right to do what I want to do, I'm now kind of have been given this new ability or dignity. I just don't think it's a true picture. I think what I have found is that when I was chasing my own satisfaction, which also had a deeper desire of really having a secure identity, feeling affirmed in who I am, and wanting to be really deeply known, which are all good things, when I would pursue that, without the context of commitment, without the context of a greater vision of life and of love, it left me feeling empty and used and confused and really didn't get me where it promised to get me. And so I think that when we look at Christianity and we say, why would God, ask us to all? He's asking not just some of us, but all of us to surrender our desires to him. And we ask him why. It's because everything he asks of us mimics his own character. And when I came to understand this better, Amy, and when I came to understand that God was asking something of me, which actually was exactly what I wanted, to find my identity in something secure, it had to do with my actions. He was saying, actually, I've designed sexuality to mimic my covenant commitment with creation. That when you experience true intimacy, it will always be a matter of vulnerability without fear. Vulnerability without fear. And that is only possible in the context of a committed covenantal relationship that says, I'm seeing all of you, I love all of you, and I'm not going anywhere. That's what God does for us in Christ. And that's what he wants us to model in the way that we experience intimacy together. It's a very specific and very high call. And so I think for me as a woman, my dignity is not in my freedom to do what I want. My dignity is being able to do what's most in line with the highest vision of myself, the vision that God set out before the creation of the world. And so I think for me, that's where I've found my rest in this question.
So David, how would you respond to someone who says that the church is really unloving towards LGBTQI people and therefore basically I'm not interested?
Yeah. I think when we talk about the church, we have like two pictures in our head. We have that like really fundamentalist, horrible person that just condemns everyone and accuses them of sin and hates them and never actually loves them and just heaps burdens on top of them until they break, and just, this kind of very horrible image of what the church is. But actually, then we have Jesus' view, the Bible's view of the church, which is the community of people who together link arm in arm to carry the cross. That even Jesus, when he carried his cross, he dropped the cross. It was too much for him to bear, and he needed other people to come along and bear that cross with him. You can read that in the Gospels. But what I found is, yes, it is a cross that, we carry together. And I think the church has failed to carry the cross with LGBTQI people. The church has failed to say, I'm coming alongside you, I'm supporting you, I'm loving you as you journey through this. This is really hard. I actually have no idea what it's like. Let me listen to you a lot before I give you any advice, But at the same time, the church needs to be able to have the authority to teach what is true. And it's actually not loving to teach someone something that's not true. And so the church is in a difficult bind, like in that sense. And so I think as LGBTQI people, we need to have a lot of grace for the church. And God said to me at a certain point in my life, because my pastor said something from the platform and I was furious about it. And it wasn't very nice. And it was condemning. And I was going to throw the towel in. Like, I was done. I'm out of the church. I'm going to go to a different church that agrees with what I think at that time that would be easier for me. And God spoke to me and said, how much grace have I had for you, David? And I was like, a lot of grace. Like a lot. So how much more grace should you have for the church? And I think we need to have a day where, in the church, where we reconcile without compromising the truth. Where we can lay down our pain and love one another through the difficulties instead of being afraid of each other. And I think both the gay rights community and the church have created this kind of bind where we just keep fighting each other instead of getting together and loving and hearing each other without trying to have to change each other. And I experienced that kind of love from the church, and then that helped me also consider God's truth in the scriptures. I needed people to love me before I could be open to what God's truth really was. Yeah.
Okay, we've got just a few moments left, and I'd love to give you both the opportunity just to speak to the young people here today. We're in Belfast, 2019, March, whatever it is. What, Madeline, would you like to say to the hundreds of young people here today to encourage them?
Oh, gosh, yes. I think as I've been sitting here and just kind of reflecting as well on, me and David have been friends now for 5 years, like really close friends, and have kind of journeyed with each other for the last 5 years through all the ups and downs of that. And I think there's something that of David's story that echoes into my story and that illuminates parts of my story and parts of mine that do the same for him. And what I think that speaks to is that the depth of this question really comes down to where we are really gaining our identity from. And it's not only, sexuality is only one place. It's a really powerful one, because I think it's just so experientially powerful, and that's a good thing. It's amazing. It's just meant for a certain context. So that's a really common one for us to gain our identity and our satisfaction from. But there's so many other places in our lives, through school. Some of you really take your studies seriously, which is also amazing, and I would never discourage you in that. But to the point where I've been there to the point where if something goes wrong or the grade doesn't come in or you're not the top of the class, that it's absolutely crushing to you. It might be in your looks and beauty. It might be in popularity. There's so many different ways that we can try to gain our identity from good things that were never meant to be ultimate things. And so if I could tell you anything as just a few yards ahead of you in this journey, it's that there's just nothing. There is nothing you could put your soul into, you could say yes to at the core of your identity that's going to lead to joy, to feeling like you are leading from a space of fullness as you care for others in your life, that kind of gives you an impenetrable, unshakable, can't really mess with you, amazing kind of security that will let you really take risk in your life. But Jesus Christ, he is the author of your life. He's the author of your faith. And his affirmation of who you are really makes you untouchable. That is what I found my journey, slowly but surely, and I'm still on that journey, but it's been just from strength to strength. And one of the critical moments was when I was in Nashville, right at the end of college, and I just had a moment with God in communion where I knew it was how many times in my life have I taken, the bread and the wine, but this time was different because I was totally overwhelmed with the emotions of shame for things I had done in my life. I felt really worthless. And in that moment, when I went and grabbed the bread and the wine, and I sat there holding them, I didn't know what this emotion was coming from. Nothing had been happening currently. I just felt overwhelming shame. And in that moment, I just saw this picture in front of me as clear as a screen that had been pulled down, and I was watching a video that I had not created myself. And it was me hovering in a corner, kind of in the fetal position with the shadows over me. And there was just this light approaching, and I knew that it was Christ. He was coming towards me, and I was terrified by it in this vision. I was trying to scooch away, trying to get away from this exposure of all the things that I was feeling filthy about. And once he really approached me, I kept my chin down all the time, and just his hand lifted my chin, so my face was just flushed with light, and I couldn't hide anymore. And in that moment, my emotional state, when nothing external had changed, did a 180 degree from feeling such darkness and heaviness to feeling the most extreme amounts of joy I've ever felt in my life. It was no doubt the presence of the Holy Spirit, because that's what he comes with. But I just got this experience of extreme delight and love and affirmation. And in that same moment, I would have thought that was primarily kind of me looking at Christ. It would have just been me towards him. But I knew that it was actually how he felt about me, even in that state. And in that moment, he just said to me that when I died so we could have this moment. This is what it's all about. And that's on offer for each of us. You don't have to have that experience. So I just want to say yes to the affirmation of Christ and fight for it, because it will change your life. So
Awesome. David, one sentence. What would you say?
I think I'd say trust Jesus with all of yourself. Yeah, just do that. And you don't have to understand everything straight away. He will reveal step by step, but just trust him with all of yourself.
Amazing.